Hello, my awesome scientist. So tonight we are going to continue our discussion of Earth's cycles due to the relationship between the sun and the earth and the moon. We have talked about day and night. We have talked about the 4 seasons. We have not talked about the 8 phases of the moon or the lunar cycle. And today we are going to talk about the tides, about how we can have high or low tides and what even causes the tides, okay? So let's make sure you are on page 122 in your journal, and you will fill in the blanks as you watch the PowerPoint. Note, you will not write everything down, but you will fill in the blanks for the information that is there, okay? So let's get started. So first of all, what are tides? Okay, so basically tides are the daily rise and fall of the Earth's waters on the coastline. Okay, as the tide comes in, the level of the water on the beach rises, and as the tide goes out, the level of the beach goes down. So you've probably seen this before if you've ever gone to the beach, maybe in Galveston or somewhere else, where at one point of the day, where your chair is, the water seems really far away, but then later in the day, all of a sudden, if you don't move your chair back, the tide is going to come and take your chair with it into the ocean. Tides occur in all bodies of water, but they're most noticeable in the ocean and in large lakes. Okay, so a high tide is when the water reaches the highest point. So you can see in this first picture that's got the red, you can see the water's coming all the way up to the dock area. But then when we have low tide, that's when the water reaches its lowest point. So you can see this is the same exact area as over here, but this is during low tide, so the water's not reaching all the way up to the dock. Okay, and so what causes the tides? Okay, basically the tides is caused by the gravitational pull of the moon. Remember, gravity is a force that pulls objects to the center of the earth. So you see here we have that position of the earth and the sun and the moon, and that combined gravitational pull, a lot of it has to do with the gravitational pull of the moon because the moon is closer to the earth than the sun, but the sun does play a small role in it as well, and that gravitational pull from the moon and even the sun is the reason for the tides. And basically, this is what I just said. Since the moon is close to Earth, it has a strong gravitational pull on it, more than the sun does because it is a little bit closer. And then that gravity is going to affect the water on the Earth's surface, and we're going to see that in just a second. So the moon pulls on the water on the side nearest to it. Okay, so if you look right here in the diagram, you see right here is our moon, and right here is the earth. So you can see that pull is happening right here where it's near the moon. We call that a tidal bulge. Okay, so you see right here how we have it kind of goes out like an oval on the 2 ends right here. Okay, those are called tidal bulges. It's that pull of the gravity that is causing that bulge on the side facing the moon. And then the reason why there's a bulge on the other side is because it's less of a strong pull, and that water is kind of left behind, so it forms that second bulge. But the key is that, as we know, the Earth doesn't stay in one position. Every day it's rotating or spinning on its axis, and so that's going to cause different places on the Earth to have high tides and low tides. Okay, so as it rotates, it's going to go through those different bulges. Okay, and so here, right here, whenever you're at that bulge, so right here and right here, when they're part of that bulge on this side, that is when we have high tide. Okay, so high tides occur where the bulges are. So basically the sides that are lined up with the moon. And then when it rotates, and this part of the world is now up here or down here, where it's like in between, basically in between the high tides, you're going to have a low tide. And that's where there's no bulge. So low tide occurs at the points in between the bulge. So every day we go through high tide, low tide, high tide, low tide. And then also, like I said, the sun is also does have an effect on it, and when all 3 are lined up, the pull is going to be a lot stronger than when it's just the moon or just the sun. And so the sun and the moon can pull together the waters in the same direction, and sometimes they pull it in different directions, and that can affect the strength of the gravitational pull, as well as how big or small that tide may be. Okay, so this is the most important thing right here. This is the most important thing that you need to remember about the tide cycle. Okay, there are a total of 4 tides every day. 2 high tides and 2 low tides. So every single day you're going to have a high tide, then you're going to have a low tide. Then you're going to have another high tide, and then you're going to have another low tide. So that's a total of 4 tides every day. Okay, but how many high tides do you have every day? Okay, so you have 2 high tides every day, and you have 2 low tides every day. When you go from high tide to low tide, that's about 6 hours and 12 minutes. When you go from high to high tide, that's about 12 to 13 hours. And this is really, really important to remember. The tide cycle, we talk about it from high tide to high tide. That's about 12 to 13 hours. So that is the key that you want to remember. So there are 2 high tides every day, 2 low tides every day, for a total of 4 tides. And from high tide to high tide is going to be about 12 to 13 hours. Kind of about half of Earth's rotation. And that's because, like you saw earlier, the Earth is rotating, and so different parts are going to experience those tides all throughout that rotation. Okay, so last thing I want us to do is label high tides and low tides on our little diagram right here. So here you have the pull, the gravitational pull of the moon. So where this first bulge is, that's going to be high tide. Right here we're going to have a what? A low tide. On the other side we're going to have a high tide, and then right here we're going to have a low tide. Okay, and to go from high tide to high tide is about 12 to 13 hours. Okay, so that's the big key information. There's a total of 4 tides, 2 highs, 2 lows every day. To go from high to high tide all the way to the next high tide is about 12 to 13 hours. So we will look a little bit more about tides tomorrow. So that is our last cycle that we will talk about between our sun, our earth, and our moon system. So make sure you study this information, and I will see you tomorrow.